Good afternoon, friends. My name is Joan Arne Halperin, and I am the grateful daughter of Polish-Jewish Sousa Mendes visa recipients. Today, we have the honor to introduce our moderator, Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, who, among many other things, is the distinguished former director of the Righteous Among the Nations Department at Yad Vashem. He is now a member of the Sousa Mendes Board of Directors, and thanks to his efforts, a square named for Aristides de Sousa Mendes will be inaugurated this November in Jerusalem. Mordechai has 2 books out now. One is Poland, the Jews and the Holocaust, which is available on Amazon, and Polish Rescuers of Jews will be available in the near future. Today's program about Jan Karski promises to be inspiring, and a Q&A session will follow the discussion. We invite you to write your questions in the chat box. Our co-host for today's program is the Jan Karski Educational Foundation, and it is with great przyjemność, that means pleasure in Polish, that I introduce their director of programming, Bożena Zaremba. Bożena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joan. It is a great honor for us to be part of this program. The creation of the Jan Karski Educational Foundation followed a successful centennial campaign to honor Jan Karski with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And the campaign was organized by a group of Polish-American and Jewish-American leaders, including some of today's panelists, and Karski's former students at Georgetown University. They all recognized the kind of the momentum created by the campaign, and after the medal was posthumously awarded to Karski in 2012, they decided to establish the Jan Karski Educational Foundation here in the US. It's based in New York with a Polish chapter in Warsaw. Our website at www.jankarski.net, which will be displayed in the chat box, you can read our official mission, which is to instill in people, especially youth, the values of leadership, courage, and integrity as exemplified by the life of Jan Karski. So for the last 10 years, we have realized this mission by creating, organizing, and funding various educational programs that honor and promote Karski's life and legacy. And SLAWOMIR GRUNBERG's documentary that you have just seen is one of the projects that we have been supporting for years. We also organized a traveling exhibition, and we have co-created and published a graphic novel, Karski's Mission to Stop the Holocaust, wonderfully written by Raphael Medoff, with stunning illustrations by Dean Motter. For the last 8 years, we have been involved in a theatrical production, Remember This, the Lesson of Jan Karski, which was created by the Lab for Global Performance and Politics at Georgetown University, and the movie Remember This, which is based on that production. They both star the Academy Award-nominated actor David Strathairn in a mesmerizing role as Karski. This movie had its world premiere 2 weeks ago at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. Besides showing Karski's life and mission, the authors of the play also ask important questions about the responsibility of an individual, now here, to act when witnessing atrocities or injustice. So this reflects another goal of the foundation, to show the contemporary relevance of the Karski legacy, to raise engaged citizens and future leaders in line with the values represented by Karski. And since 2013, we have been funding scholarships for young Polish public servants, scholars, and social activists to participate in the prestigious Georgetown Leadership Seminar. And this year, we are also soliciting funding for 2 Ukrainian refugees residing temporarily in Poland. So again, I invite you to visit our bilingual website at www.jankarski.net, where you can find lots of information about Karsky, about his life. There are links to his speeches, interviews, and lots of educational resources. You can also sign up for our newsletter, share your story about Karsky, and get links to our social media pages. I can be reached at buzaremba@jankarski.net. Thank you. Mordechai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bożena. I will first give a brief timeline in chronological order of the main highlights of the acts and deeds of Jan Karski. This is, you have 2 photos of Jan Karski. Jan Karski is a young man on the left, and Jan Karski later on in life. He was born in 1914. He died in the year 2000. Next slide, please. So he wasn't born as Jan Karski. He was born as Jan Kozielewski. He was born in Łódź, where he writes that he befriended many Jewish people in Lodz. Lodz was a big Jewish center. In 1940, he joined the Polish underground, and there he adopted the name of Jan Karski. He became then a courier between the underground and the Polish government in exile in London. And one of his missions, before he set out for London, he secretly met in Warsaw with Jewish ghetto leaders. He was smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto. He wanted to see for himself what was happening there, as well as a transit camp, where people were taken on the way to the Belgians' death camps. When he arrived in London, he began to report to the Polish government in exile and to Shmuel Ziegelbaum, who was the Jewish representative in the Polish government. There were 2 Jewish people in the Polish government. He met with Anthony Eden, British Foreign Secretary. Then he continued to the United States. In 1943, he met with Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, and he met with President Roosevelt on July 28, 43. In 44, he published a book called The Story of a Secret State, and we will talk about that. And then he began to study at the Georgetown University, and he joined the faculty. In 1982, he was honored as the righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. And as I said earlier, he died in Washington, D.C. in the year 2000. And now a little bit, I will elaborate a little bit more on that. So when we talk about Jan Karski, right, we talk about a non-Jewish Polish underground person who took the initiative to alarm the world of what was happening to the Jews in Poland. Not isolated killings here and there, but part of a larger master plan to exterminate every living Jew, man, woman, and child. He could only talk about Polish Jews, not those living in other countries of which he was not aware. But there were 3 million Jews in Poland, the largest concentration of Jews in Europe. Suspecting that his words would be doubted and not believed, he asked to be smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto, doing what the Germans called the Great Action, Großaktion, where close to 300,000 of its inhabitants were deported to the gas chambers of Treblinka. He asked that so that he would see for himself, with his own eyes, the horrible scenes taking place from a secret lookout inside the ghetto. Not satisfied with that, he asked to be smuggled into a concentration camp, an operation that could not be carried out. So he was smuggled into an advanced camp, not far from Belzec, where people were unloaded and transferred to other transports on the way to Belzec. All this Karsky did since, as an underground courier, he was on the eve of another secret journey to London to report to the Polish government there. Before being smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto, he met 2 Jewish ghetto leaders at a secret rendezvous on the so-called Aryan side of Warsaw. As he later recorded, as he sat almost paralyzed by what his ears were recording, he was listening to their doomsday litany of Polish Jewry. One of the leaders, either Leon Feiner of the Bund organization or Menachem Kirschenbaum of the Zionist organization, told the stunned Karsky, and this is what they told him: "You other Poles are fortunate. You are suffering too. Many of you will die, but at least your nation goes on living. After the war, Poland will be resurrected. Your cities will be rebuilt, and your wounds will be slowly healed. Your country will emerge again, but the Polish Jews will no longer exist. We will be dead. Hitler will lose his war against the human, the just, and the good, but he will win his war against the Polish Jews. The Jewish people will be murdered. Our entire people will be destroyed. A few may be saved, perhaps, but 3 million Polish Jews are doomed." After a silent pause, sitting speechless, Karsky then pulled himself together and asked, what plan of action are they asking for him to deliver to Jewish and non-Jewish leaders? They responded, "Go to all the important English and American offices and agencies. Place this responsibility on the shoulders of the Allies. Let not a single leader of them be able to say that they did not know that we were being murdered in Poland and could not be helped. As to Jewish leaders, tell them not to leave until they have obtained guarantees that a way has been decided upon to save the Jews. Let them accept no food or drink. Let them die a slow death while the world is looking on. Let them die. This may shake the conscience of the world." As Karsky sank into his armchair, in his words, as he recorded, "My whole body felt chilled and sore. I was shivering, and I felt the pulses in my temples pounding. I rose to go. He was stopped, for the two Jewish speakers had something else to tell them. 1 moment more," they said. "The ghetto is going to go up in flames. We are not going to die in slow torment, but fighting. We will declare war on Germany, the most hopeless declaration of war that has ever been made." Later in London, when he delivered the message of the ghetto leaders to Shmuel Ziegelbaum, one of the two Jewish representatives in the Polish government in exile, of the demand to stage hunger strikes simultaneous with appealing to the Allies, Ziegelbaum rose from his chair and in a loud voice responded, "It is utterly impossible. You know what would happen. They would simply bring in 2 policemen and have me dragged away to an institution." A few weeks later, Ziegelbaum committed suicide. Karsky wrote that he felt shock, grief, and guilt. "I felt as though I had personally handed Ziegelbaum his death warrant." Karsky added that Ziegelbaum's death was the sharpest revelation of the extent to which the world had become cold and unfriendly, indifferent and selfish. But Karsky retained his self-composure and confidence, and mindful of his mission, he continued with messages in order to alarm the world. He met with various leaders, in Britain with Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, and in the United States with President Franklin Roosevelt, who listened attentively to what Karsky was reporting, but remained silent on proposals to help out. In a meeting with Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, he told Karsky, "I believe you are telling the truth, but I am unable to believe you," because the details were too horrific. Such terrible deeds from a cultured country like Germany. Feeling that he had failed in his mission, Karsky later wrote, "I wanted to run away after the war. I saw too much misery, hatred, ruthlessness, and other horrible things. What I learned from the war made me silent for 30 years. To tell us more about Jan Karski, we have 3 distinguished speakers who will follow each other in their presentations. They are the well-known Dr. Michael Berenbaum and Abraham Foxman, as well as the filmmaker SLAWOMIR GRUNBERG. I will say a few words about our 3 speakers. Dr. Michael Berenbaum is an American scholar, professor, rabbi, and writer who specializes in the study of the Holocaust. He played a leading role in the creation of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and was the project director of the Shoah Foundation that interviewed thousands of survivors. He currently teaches at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Berenbaum is the author of many books on the Holocaust. And I will mention just a few, such as The World Must Know the History of the Holocaust, as told in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and Witness to the Holocaust, an illustrated documentary history of the Holocaust in the words of its victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. Berenbaum is, in my eyes, the currently most knowledgeable and celebrated Holocaust historian in the United States. As for Abraham Foxman, he too has a distinguished career. For 28 years, he was the national director of the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, although he was active in that organization for a longer period of time. He made a mark as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, bigotry, and discrimination, and spoke out on issues of terrorism, church-state relations, religious intolerance, as well as issues relating to the Holocaust. Himself a hidden child during the Holocaust, he has invited the Hidden Child Foundation to have an office within the ADL offices in order to continue to gather and record survival stories of children, many of them hidden by non-Jews. Finally, SLAWOMIR GRUNBERG. He is an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker, and his films include Everything is in Your Hands, Still Life in Łódź, Karsky and the Lords of Humanity that many of you saw, and many more. His film, School Prayer, A Community at War, received an Emmy Award and the Jan Karski Award for Moral Courage. Grunberg is a recipient of other honors, such as the Guggenheim Fellowship, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and credits as director of photography. Me, Michael Berenbaum, and Abe Foxman go back many years when I was at Yad Vashem. And I am thankful to have learned a lot from them on issues dealing with the Holocaust. And now to the speakers. Dr. Berenbaum, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mordechai. This is an appropriate way for us to commemorate Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which is the day of the destruction of the first and second temples, the exile of the Jewish people, and also the day of the Spanish, by tradition, the Spanish Inquisition, and has a very particular meaning for the Holocaust, because it is on this day in 1942 that the Grand Action, the Great Action that deported 265,000 Jews at minimum to Treblinka began. Treblinka opened on June 22nd. The deportation began on Treblinka opened on July 22nd. The deportation began on July 23rd. And for those of you who want to keep time and understand it, between Tisha B'Av, which is today, and Yom Kippur, the deportation of the Jews of Warsaw began on July 23rd. It ended on September 21st in the Grand Action, and at least 265,000 Jews were deported. What Mordechai did not tell you is that I was a close friend of Jan Karski's. I taught with him at Georgetown University for many years. I had his students, he had my students as well. And let me tell you a little bit of a humorous story with Jan Karski, because each year I had my students see Shoah, the great film by Claude Lanzmann. And Karsky is featured in Shoah, and he's featured there the way he looks here, as a little bit of an old man. And my students would then bump into him in the dining room of the cafeteria, walking around campus, and they would go up to him and they would say, Jan Karski, I thought you were dead. And he would call me immediately thereafter and say, Professor Bergenbaum, you tell your students that I am alive, there will be plenty of time for me to be dead. And I used to tell my students that the easiest way to fail my course is to walk up to Jan Karski and say, I thought you were dead. I had the privilege of speaking at Jan Karski's funeral. And speaking at Jan Karski's funeral, we had also the incredible privilege, which is the Jewish community of Warsaw sent a white armband with a Jewish star on it and asked that Jan Karski be buried in that, with that Jewish star, an authentic remnant of the way in which Jews were marked in Warsaw. And we got permission to open the coffin and to put a white armband on his right sleeve, because he felt himself, in the aftermath of what he had taken on himself, he felt himself to be an honorary Jew. I recited the Kaddish at Professor Karski's funeral, which was in the great St. Matthew's Church in Washington, D.C. And even the then chief rabbi of Israel gave me a little bit of a pass. He said, I'm not certain that one can say Kaddish for a non-Jew, but if there is any non-Jew for whom Kaddish should be said and deserves to be said, it is Jan Karski. Let me talk about three elements of the Karsky legacy that I think is important. I'd like to go back to the event that Mordechai pointed out, which is the meeting with Felix Frankfurter. To hear the event described by Karsky, at the end, Karsky met with three Jews, the highest three Jews in the Roosevelt administration, and it was designed to get a meeting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. At the end of the meeting, Felix Frankfurter lingered. He did not leave when the others left. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was in the home of the ambassador of Poland to the United States, a man by the name of Chekhanov. And Frankfurter paced up and down, back and forth, and he said, young man, I can't believe you. The ambassador interrupted and said, I swear, Felix, I swear on the life of my children that this man is telling the truth, because it is on his word that we commit troops, that we commit men, we commit personnel, and we commit money. And I swear on the life of my children that he's telling the truth. And then Frankfurter said the words Mordechai said, which is, it's not a matter of what he's telling the truth. I can't believe him. And that for us as historians becomes a very important distinction. It's the distinction between receiving information, internalizing that information, feeling it confirmed, and then acting on the information. So ever since the great work of the late Walter Lacour, scholars have made the distinction between knowledge and information. Karsky met with Roosevelt, and he did report on Roosevelt. And one of the reasons Karsky was deeply trusted by everybody is that he had a photographic memory, and he could compartmentalize the information he received. And by compartmentalizing the information he received, the Polish political forces were divided, the Jews were divided, the Poles were divided, and he could tell each of the divided representatives in London, originally in France and then in London, he could tell them what they needed to know without telling them the privileged information that was given to him by the other parties. And he knew what to say, and in a very important way, what not to say. He met with Eden, but we have to report that he did not meet with Winston Churchill. It sufficed with Eden. When he met with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he described it, and this is one of the words that was used in the film. He was meeting with the Lord of humanity, the most powerful man in the world, the person upon whom the fate of the Western world depended, and the only one who could chart the course to victory for the United States. He came, he met with him. Remember, when he met with him, it was still 1943 and the Hungarian Jewish community was not yet destroyed. He told him, and he then described Roosevelt, who had a pinky holder, and he would do an imitation of Roosevelt, the pinky holder, where he had a cigarette. He took his thing and he said, "You tell your people that we shall win the war, and then we shall do something about the refugees." And Karsky, who is a young man, in his own words, a nobody, speaking to the Lord of humanity, mumbled to himself loud enough for the president to hear, "By then it will be too late." Now that gives you a sense of American policy. American policy was, we will win the war. The priority of the United States was number 1, 2, 3, and 4 was win the war. And then we shall do something about the refugees. America did not understand, did not perceive as a nation and as its leadership, that in essence, the Nazis were fighting two wars, a war against the Jews, or the racial war, and the world war. And in fact, when push came to shove, the reality is that primacy was given to the war against the Jews. The evidence for that is very simply that the two moments when the most Jews were deported were the two moments when Germany was most vulnerable on the war front, 1942, when on the Soviet front of the war, the German soldiers were bogged down in the coldness of winter. That's when the deportations to death camps began. And in 1944, the deportation of Hungarian Jews was at the same time as Germany was facing an invasion from the Soviet Union from the east, and the United States and the Allied armies from the west, and was facing its greatest vulnerability, and they were determined to win the war against the Jews, even if they were not going to win the World War. Let me add one moment to the Karsky relationship to the Shmuel Ziegelblum decision that only in death could he make a statement, and he wrote a letter, a warning to the world, a call to the world to action. Ziegelblum met at that point with one other American representative, who was an American, who later became one of the most prominent American Jews of the last half of the 20th century, and that is Arthur J. Goldberg, who became Secretary of Labor during the Kennedy administration, then a Supreme Court justice, and finally a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Goldberg was then a major working for the OSS, for the Strategic Services of the United States, which is the precursor of the CIA. And Goldberg was one of his generation's most unique Jews, because he was prepared to work in the highest echelons of the American government, but also was never shy about advancing a Judeo-centric agenda and acting on behalf of his people, on behalf of the Jewish people at the same time. He informed Ziegelblum correctly that the United States would not be doing anything about what was happening, that it would essentially try to win the war and then address the problem. So given the double whammy of Jan Karski giving him the information that he gave him at precisely the moment at which the Warsaw Ghetto uprising was the Warsaw deportations was happening, and also at the same moment as he was receiving information that the United States would be doing nothing. He sent him into a level of anxiety and despair that symbolic death became the only way in which he could fulfill the mission. I was with Karsky when he spoke for the first time, and that is he spoke at Washington Hebrew Congregation some 30 years after all of what he had been through had happened. And after that, he continued to speak again and again and again. And the most intriguing thing about it is every time you heard it, you heard exactly the same thing. Literally, almost word for word, gesture by gesture, nuance by nuance, because in his own words, he had become a tape recorder, he had become a messenger. In 1944, he could no longer return to Poland. He also had a scar from an attempted suicide, as you know. Therefore, he was discoverable. And because he could no longer return to Poland, he felt free to tell the story in the United States. He published Anatomy of the Secret State. He spoke all over the country. He published in each of the major magazines of the United States. He told the story when he believed that it could make a difference. And the tragedy of his life was that it, and our situation, is that it did not make a difference. And then he held with scorn those who said afterwards that they did not know. What he really understood was that the information was available to those who cared enough and to those who were ready to believe the worst and therefore internalize it, act upon it. And the last thing I want to say about Karsky was that this was, of all the people I've met in my life, this was a man who personified nobility. I always felt when I was in his presence, even in the most loosest of circumstances, even in bars and seminar rooms and faculty meetings, I always felt that I was in the presence of nobility. And it was a privilege to have him grace my life. And one of the truly great men that I've been honored to meet. Let me turn it over to my colleague and friend and a child survivor and a champion of the Jewish people, Abe Foxman.
Thank you, Michael. It's with a great sense of humility that I find myself on this panel. I guess what qualifies me is that I was privileged to be touched by Jan Karski. It was through my role and responsibility as director of the Anti-Defamation League and involved with the ADL that I developed a relationship with this courageous, gentle giant who all his life bore witness to the truth, to the horrific truth, and also understood that it came from hate. It came from anti-Semitism. So we built that relationship because we provided him with platforms to speak, to educate. He cared very, very much to focus his message to the young people. But everything, Michael, you've said, the nobility of this man, but it was painful. It was painful sometimes to be with him because he felt and knew and understood that he failed in his mission. Again, at the Anti-Defamation League, we honored him with the Courage to Care Award, which recognized the righteous, the courageous. Before I left the ADL, I was able to change the name of ADL's Courage to Care Award to the Jan Karski Courage to Care Award. The most wonderful and yet painful experience that I want to share with you was a trip that I was on with Jan Karski to Poland. The ADL had a mission to Poland, two purposes. One was to honor some righteous Polish Christians who saved Jews, and we asked Jan Karski to be part of that. But also, we set up a series of seminars on anti-Semitism. And Jan Karski was not only concerned with general anti-Semitism, he was very, very much focused on anti-Semitism in Poland. And the trip had a mixed experience for him. When we honored the righteous Christians, he was up and celebrated and full of joy and hope. But then when he spoke about anti-Semitism, he was criticized. He was called a Jew lover. It was a very, very painful experience for him to come back to Poland to raise his voice against bigotry and be the recipient of that bigotry. I'll never forget on the trip back when he said to me, Abe, I'm not sure I will ever return to Poland. And sadly, he never did. Karsky, who should be Poland's modern-day hero, was not recognized only recently. And so it's very special that we have this program. It's special that the film and the foundation, because Karsky should be everybody's hero, not only Poland's. Because he had the integrity, the courage, the heroism to see and to tell and to go on, even knowing that he did not succeed.
Karsky had an air of moral aristocracy about him, and his narrative had all the appeal of the adventures of James Bond. His dream was to become a diplomat. He was smart, handsome, he studied foreign languages.
He was working for the Polish underground.
One of the leaders in Krakow gave me a microfilm. Gestapo found this microfilm. They could prove you are a spy.
On May 5th, 1943, a secret telegram from Poland's foreign ministry reached the embassy in the United States.
Karsky was on his way to Washington with a very special mission to inform President Roosevelt personally of what was going on in Poland.
He saw a lord of humanity. When you describe them, what is happening to the Jews, they will not believe you. What would help our cause if you, with your own eyes, see the situation in the Warsaw Ghetto? I couldn't take anymore, but I reported. We have a choice. We can choose to be robbers, we can choose to be good people. Now I go back 35 years. No, I don't go back, you know. It's not true.
If you find yourself in a circumstance, whatever it is, you can do something to make a difference. Let Karsky's story be one of those that inspires you to try.
The picture is worth 1,000 words, and I was ready to explain why I did film about Jan Karski, but actually my two speakers who were before me, distinguished speakers, they already explained why there should be film about Jan Karski. In my film, I wanted to present an earnest portrait of a brave man who juggled between life and death while fulfilling a desperate mission to stop the destruction of European Jews. And he dedicated himself to struggle for truth, justice, and equality. And you have to remember also something what very few people do, that when the war began, he was just 25 years old. He was really young. He received a proposition which would have been declined by the vast majority of people, and took a huge risk by infiltrating the Warsaw Ghetto and Nazi transit camp. There he witnessed the horrors of the Holocaust in order to carry out a first-hand report to the Western Allies and the world's leaders. My film proves in some way that Jan Karski was a man who would sacrifice his life in the name of humanity. Jan Karski was disappointed because, as he said, I wanted to save millions, but I could not save anybody at all. This is a quote from my film, and he mentioned this many times in many interviews. But in my film, following claims and findings by historian Sir Martin Gilbert, I tried to prove that Karsky was wrong, and that indirectly, as a result of his action, President Roosevelt created in January of 1944 War Refugee Board, which saved about 200,000 Romanian and Hungarian Jews. When I started working on this film, this was 2007, and it took me 7 years to complete it. At the beginning, it was suggested to me that I should use a reenactment in order to reconstruct scenes like Karsky being arrested by Gestapo, dangerous entrance to Warsaw Ghetto, and his transitional camp, and his presence at the transitional camp in Izbica. But I was never a fan of reenactment in documentary films, and so I didn't follow this route. At the same time, a year later, I watched Israeli animated film Waltz with Bashir, and I found it extremely moving, and it became my inspiration to use partially animation in my film. You could see it in this trailer. A similar innovative fusion of technology was employed by our team to create this effect, to tell Karsky's compelling story. And many archival images which you have already seen in other movies, you could see in different way because they are combined with animation, and these images regain their original sharpness and still remain unreal. I did my film thinking about a young audience. I wanted to reach people who are high school students, who are university students. And in my opinion, Karsky is a universal, timeless hero who should be a role model for youth all over the world. It is young people's nature to seek the meaning of life and role models with good morals. And this is why in the final scene of the film, which it was included in this trailer, Sir Martin Gilbert, an official biographer of Winston Churchill, says, "If you ever find yourself in a position to do something to change the world, let the story of Karsky be your inspiration? Showing this film to young people all over the world and listening to their questions, which they ask after the screening, it really proved to me how much Karsky's actions could inspire young people. Distribution of the film is very unusual for documentary. I would say this is out of almost 50 films I did, the best example how the film could be widely distributed over the world, all over the world. The film was and is still widely shown in Poland. There were dozens of screenings of the film in schools, high schools, universities, and Polish television screened this film on many occasions. Adding to this, we have theatrical release of the film in Poland and in Russia by distributors who are now working because of the situation in Ukraine, and United States. The film by theatrical release had over 100,000 viewers, which is very unusual for a documentary film. The film has German, French, Russian, Spanish, Hebrew version. There are subtitles, and currently you can see it in Poland on Netflix and internationally on Primetime, Vimeo, and many other television platforms. The film was shown with Spanish subtitles in San Jose, Costa Rica, for example. And the screening was organized, among others, by the Human Rights Festival in Costa Rica, Ministry of Education of Costa Rica, and Yad Vashem. And the screening brought thousands of students from all over the country to the big screen, to the biggest screen in San Jose. Many buses, many days of screenings. I was there. It was amazing experience. And Spanish version of this film was also shown on many different occasions in Mexico, a country where I currently reside. Jan Karski wanted to be a diplomat. He studied to be a diplomat, and this was his dream, which was never fulfilled. And sitting on the bench next to Jan Karski at Georgetown University, I had this thought that my film, which reached far over 100,000 viewers all over the world, by showing Karski's actions, by listening to his words and his fight against all form of discrimination, perhaps fulfill his wish. It made Karsky a diplomat.
Well, at the beginning of this program, I said this program promises to be inspiring, but I didn't know it was going to break my heart and probably touch the heart of everybody here. It was marvelous. Thank you all of you for your participation. It's my job and honor to talk about the offer that the Sousa Mendes Foundation has for you, our guests. So with a donation to the foundation, you will receive 2 autographed and inscribed books by Raphael Madoff, who was our guest last week, excuse me. And these books are, one is a beautiful coffee table book talking about how comics are used to teach about the Holocaust, something very new and something that we wouldn't have thought about years and years ago. And the second book we're offering is Karsky's Mission to Stop the Holocaust, which is a graphic novel. And in the back, Raphael Madoff gives the whole history of Karsky. We'll send that to you for a donation. And you have until 10 p.m. this Wednesday, August 10th, to make that, to do that. Also, I'd like to just speak about our program next week, which is going to be about another hero, a very big hero that everybody knows about, Schindler, but not so many people know about his wife, Emily Schindler. So Sunday, August 14th at 4 p.m., Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, who you met today and have met many times before on our programs, will be on the panel with the biographer of Schindler, Dr. David Crow, and one of the children of Schindler's, of the people that Schindler saved. So that will be, there'll be a film to watch, a BBC film called The Accidental Hero, and then the program on August 14th. And that's a free program. So, Bożena, what did you find in the chat?
Wonderful questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to cover all of them, but let's start with the movie. There was a comment about the coverage and the photos that somebody has never seen before, and I think that most of us who have not seen the movie have never seen them before. So the question is, did Karsky take any photos? Was he able to? And if he would have been able to take any pictures of the ghetto with him to show in the United States?
No, it was not possible. The only archival footage from the ghetto was made by Germans. They were working on the propaganda film about Warsaw Ghetto, and this footage survived in Berlin archives, and that's where the footage is from. But practically there was no, with one exception, there was no footage shot by anyone as video, as film in the Warsaw Ghetto.
And the important thing when you look at the German film is that it was shot as propaganda film, but there's a very interesting film called An Unfinished Film, which shows the complete film of what they took, because accidentally they portrayed some very truthful elements of what was happening in the Warsaw Ghetto. They did not display that in their final film, but they captured it because they caught material that was accidental. And that's one of the ways in which we can see what was happening. And let's also say one other thing, which is that the perspective of the photographer often shapes what you experience in a film or even in a photograph. And that's why one of the things we do when we show certain photographs in museums is we show, for example, how we make sure not to crop it, because there are clandestine photographs, for example, that show that they were taken inside a building in a hidden manner. And there's some of the most important film pictures we have, photographs we have of the Holocaust itself.
Another question related to that is, there was a comment that Felix Frankfurter did not believe Karsky. Would he have believed if he had seen any of that footage or any photos from the ghetto?
What did it take to let me answer it theoretically and then practically. Sociologically, knowledge requires three things: information, confirmation, or what they call objectification, and then internalization. Information comes out, something confirms it as true, and then you internalize it, and you see the world through that perspective. The Jews who were crazy about rescue issues, who pushed like hell, were the Jews who got the information, believed the information, and then internalized it, and they could not conduct business as usual. That happened to different people at different times, and it happened to people not at all. One example, Alan Dulles, who was the head of the OSS, one of the highest ranking people in the OSS, later became head of the CIA. When he saw the film footage of the concentration camps after the war, the material that was took, he said, so it's true. Meaning only post-war When it came, did they believe that it was true? And Dwight David Eisenhower said, when he went to Ohrdruf, I made the visit deliberately. I went into every nook and cranny, because if someday they want to say it was propaganda, I want to say that I was there.
May I add something to what Michael said about the distinction between knowledge and information? Well, that may be true 42 or 43, but in 1944, during the Hungarian phase, at least the leaders of the United States and England knew what was happening in Auschwitz as a result of the reports of Werber and Wetzlar. And when Jewish organization pleaded with them that the Allied planes flying over Auschwitz, as testified by Elie Wiesel, dropped some bombs on the gas chambers, or at least bombed the tracks leading into Auschwitz, and at least postponed. Well, the leader of the United States and England came up with various excuses, and the planes were flying over Auschwitz. And later on, they flew to Warsaw to help the Polish insurgents, and most of the things that they dropped fell into German hands. Well, the Allies found all kinds of excuses not to bomb Auschwitz, but they bombed some facilities a few miles away from Auschwitz, which were producing synthetic oil. Therefore, with all due respect to knowledge and information, there was a lack of willingness as late as August 44 to do something and at least contain the Holocaust.
Let me add to Mordechai and complicate it for a bit. We have an exact timetable of when information became knowledge in Palestine. And I'm using Palestine because I'm a historian, it's pre-state Israel. I'm not presuming any politics involved. On June 11th, 1944, there was a meeting of the Yishuv leadership. The request was made that they asked that Auschwitz be bombed. The conclusion of the meeting, attended by Ben-Gurion's cabinet, was we do not know enough about the situation in Poland to advance a request that innocent Jews be killed. On July 8th, there was a meeting in London with Chaim Weizmann and Moshe Shartak, who later became Moshe Sharet, the first foreign minister of Israel and second prime minister of Israel. They met with Anthony Eden and requested that Auschwitz be bombed. What happened between June 11th and July 8th? And remember, that's 26 days. What happened is that the information of the Werber-Wetzlar report, an information compiled by a man who escaped Auschwitz on two men who escaped Auschwitz on April 7th, who reported the information to the Slovakian underground, the Slovakian Jewish underground, in May and early June, made its way to Palestine. The complete copy of what's called the Werber-Wetzlar report or the Auschwitz protocols did not make its way to the United States, though it was circulating in London and in Palestine in the days between the 11th of June and the 8th of July. So the point being, with absolute precision, that's the moment when information became knowledge. And one of the ironies is that one of the fighters who did drop bombs on Buna-Monovitz, and the reason we dropped bombs on Buna-Monovitz is because we had the absolute priority of synthetic oil and synthetic rubber, and because that's the way in which Germany lost World War I. One of the flyers was no less than George McGovern, whom I interviewed. And you don't think of George McGovern as a fighter pilot, but he and George H.W. Bush were both fighter pilots, Bush in the Pacific, McGovern in the Atlantic. He said, we did not know. And he said, I had people on my crew by the name of Katz, Cohn, and Friedman. And had they known, they would have forced me to dive bomb and go right in. He said, we had no information. We found it was never tasked and consequently, all the information of the American government never reached one place to, in post 9/11 language, to connect the dots.
Do we have time for another question, Joanne? Well, there were several factual questions, so I think I have to refer everybody to either Karsky's Story of a Secret State or his biography by Tom Wood. But there is one more interesting question that probably we should ask is, how does Karsky's story relate to Vitold Pilecki, and how does his story reflect on the legacies of President Roosevelt, Justice Frankfurter, and Rabbi Weiss?
Oh, that's going to take hours to. You're asking a question. We have to have a special conference on that.
Maybe that can be our final thoughts.
That opinions are divided as never before. I think Michael would agree with me, and everybody's got his own opinion about Roosevelt and Churchill and including the Jewish leadership, Stephen Wise, David Ben-Gurion. Maybe we should leave it for another time.
Let's put it to you this way. In retrospect, they all failed to be able to take effective action against the Holocaust. The question that we have is, what might effective action have looked like? And the reality, the best line on this was written by a rabbi, a wonderful rabbi by the name of Haskell Lookstein, who said the Holocaust may have been unstoppable, meaning nothing that the American Jewish community or American government, recent work by Yehuda Bauer would say, nothing that they could have done would have stopped it, but it should have been unbearable, and it wasn't. And and Abe Foxman can testify to this. One of the obligations of the Jewish community today is to make suffering of the Jewish people unbearable, first of all for Jews, and secondly for people who can help the Jews to remain safe and secure and alive.
Okay, Mordechai, will you ask everyone for their final thoughts, please?
Well, maybe Abe Foxman, you're keeping your silence, but maybe you want to say something with reference to what you just heard.
I want to take it back to Karsky. What we heard, goes way, way beyond, and as you say, it's for other hours of discussions. I want to bring it back to Karsky. I have a frustration. Karsky should be a household word for anybody who cares, studies, knows the Shoah, and he's not. Karsky should be Poland's national treasure, their hero, and he's not. And so to settle for maybe less, maybe every Holocaust museum should have a room or a wall dedicated to his deeds and his heroism. And now that there is this marvelous film, maybe this film should be shown in every Holocaust museum around the world. Certainly Karsky deserves it, and we need it. We need that message. We need that inspiration. We need that hope. And maybe this program will move it a little bit closer. So thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, so I'm going to give my thoughts, and then I'll turn it over to Michael for the final thoughts. I just want to say that, the SS guards in Auschwitz elsewhere were taunting the prisoners. You see, your friends in America and England, they don't care. They don't bomb. They don't do anything. There is a passage in the diaries of Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, who said, actually, they are happy with what we're doing for the Jews, but they're cowards. They don't have the guts to admit it, but they are not so unhappy with what we're doing. So whether the Holocaust could have been stopped or not, the fact that the signals that went out to the Nazi leaders was that the world does not care, and they can go on. They could go on with impunity. I would like to add the words of Elie Wiesel, who described Karsky as a man of absolute integrity and of extraordinary force of character. But Karsky was also a wounded person, as was mentioned here. He was fighting to hold back the memories of what he had seen, especially the horrors of the roundup of Jews inside the Warsaw Ghetto. Wiesel writes, "I saw tears in his eyes. I think he felt that he failed." As Karsky also told Wiesel, "I tried to speak and people didn't want to hear. All those great individuals, presidents, ambassadors, cardinals, who said they were shocked, they lied, they knew or didn't want to know. This shocked me. I said to myself, Karsky, you are helpless. Give up the subject." But years later, when he broke the silence, he came out forcefully and spoke before many audiences of what he saw and what he tried to accomplish. I was privileged to meet Jan Karski on 2 occasions. The last one when I chaired a ceremony in his honor and in his presence at Yad Vashem 2 years before his death. I remember a question asked by Professor Israel Gutman to Karsky, how to combat anti-Semitism. And Karsky said, it's like a hopeless struggle because anti-Semitism is a mental defect. It's a mental illness. And there are too many people in this world. And there will always be people in this world who will be mentally disturbed and they'll become anti-Semites. So the fight must go on, but it'll never be won. The significance of Karsky in my eyes is, first of all, here we have a proud Pole and devout Catholic, who decided that having witnessed some of the horrible scenes of the Holocaust in his own country, he felt he had a duty and obligation to try to do something in order to stem the mass extermination of Jews by alarming British and US leaders. He was able to say to those willing to listen, I was there, and so the thing I'm telling you with my own eyes. It is not something merely reported to me. I saw it myself. And that's the important thing. He could say, I saw it myself. And I don't speak out, I'm not speaking as a Jew. I don't have a Jewish agenda here. I simply feel as a human being that something must be done to stop this horrific event that is still taking place. And ways have to be found to stop it and not to argue that there's nothing one can do until the war is over and the Nazis are defeated. There was no one else like Karsky, telling both Jewish and non-Jewish leaders not to procrastinate with various excuses, but try to do something about it now and not a moment too soon. A man of great character and courage, of nobility in Berenbaum's words, and everyone's hero in Foxman's words. This is how we remember him. And now, Michael Berenbaum, the last words from you.
He told us what we needed to know. When he thought it could have made a difference, it should have made a difference. And the tragedy of his life and the tragedy of what happened in the aftermath of when he told the story is we could have known, we should have known, and we did not. And that's why he felt his life, that part of his life, a deep and profound failure, but it was not for want of trying.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. Thank you, guests. Come back next week. We're all getting a Holocaust education here. I feel like I'm getting a PhD. Thank you very much. Good night.